future of Gaza is uncertain. Palestinians want to take the lead in shaping it.
We know the place, we know the system, so we're the most competent to run this system.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Today, what comes next for Gaza? Also on the show, support for Germany's far right from leaders in the West.
I don't think they contact each other and say, let's support the far right, but we are definitely seeing a realignment.
Plus, the virus that causes bird flu is spreading.
There's a lot of virus being carried in the wild bird population, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe.
Now the UK is requiring farmers to keep their chickens inside to stop the spread.
And could a protein save us from plastic?
All those stories and more today on The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for being here today. We begin with news from the United Nations Security Council. The Trump administration is seeking approval there for a Gaza stabilization force.
The U.S. has put together a draft resolution for the plan, but it's not clear if the resolution can pass the 15-member UN Security Council. There are still questions about which countries would contribute troops to a stabilization force.
Another major piece of unfinished business in Trump's peace plan for Gaza, the creation of a Palestinian governing body for the war-torn territory. The World's Matthew Bell has more.
If and when international peacekeeping forces are sent into Gaza, the key to their success will be cooperation with the Western-backed Palestinian Authority, not simply importing outsiders to run the show, as Dr. Sabri Saidam told me recently. He's a former Palestinian cabinet member and advisor to PA President Mahmoud Abbas.
Importing outside leaders or importing international force to man Gaza is not going to be helpful if it's not coordinated to the Palestinian Authority. We know the place, we know the system, so we're the most competent to run this system. So when Palestinian government says that it is ready to engage, that means it is ready to engage.
Officials from the main Palestinian political factions are discussing next steps now. Egypt is hosting those negotiations in Cairo. They're focused on creating a new temporary administration to run the civic affairs of Gaza. This is part of the 20-point peace plan drawn up by President Trump. But what's missing from that plan are many details about who would be part of that governing body and how it would work. Ziad Abu Zayed is a former Palestinian legislator and advisor in peace talks with Israel. He says the first question that needs to be settled in Cairo is about what Hamas does next.
Hamas said very clearly that they are ready to abandon any future role in the administration of Gaza. And Hamas can convert itself to become a political party. But there should be one decision, one political decision, one legitimate army. And therefore, Hamas should abandon its weapons and give them to the Palestinian state.
The Israeli government is skeptical that Hamas will ever agree to disarm. Here's President Trump speaking about that in mid-October, right after the truce in Gaza went into effect.
How long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
Trump administration officials say the International Stabilization Force in Gaza, when it's created, will be focused on disarming Hamas. But that's not addressing the fundamental issue here, according to Ziad Abu Zayed, the former Palestinian negotiator. He says the Trump administration is making a mistake by refusing to engage directly with Palestinian leaders to move forward on something that's actually mentioned in Trump's peace plan, a future Palestinian state.
You cannot make any plan for the future of Gaza separately from the future of the West Bank and without the involvement of the Palestinian leadership. Because the integrity of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the geographical and political integrity, is one of the main points of the Oslo Accords, which was agreed by both Israel and the Palestinians.
The current right-wing Israeli government opposes the idea of Palestinian statehood. That's a position held by fewer and fewer governments around the world. In 2025, 11 different countries recognized the state of Palestine. Among them, some of the closest allies of the United States: Australia, Belgium, Canada, France, Mexico, and here's Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
The United Kingdom formally recognizes the state of Palestine.
Out of a total of 193 UN member states, 157 of them now have taken that step. But for many Palestinians, especially those living in the Gaza Strip, the idea of statehood feels detached from their reality. Osama Khalut is a displaced schoolteacher from the city of Khan Yunis. He says his home was destroyed. When we asked him about the road ahead toward a Palestinian state, he scoffed at the question.
بتحكي بموضوع كبير دولة مين اليهود بدهمش هذا المواضيع كلها اليهود بيشتغلوا قاعدين على الضفة والآن بيكملوا في غزة.
Is this really a big deal for the international community? What statehood? Khalut says. Israel is preventing this in the West Bank. And in Gaza, the Israelis don't want to see Hamas in control, so they're making excuses to continue to attack and kill more people. What Israel wants, he says, is a state of chaos. This all comes after 2 years of war in Gaza, tens of thousands of deaths, widespread destruction, and continued scarcity of even the basics like food, water, and medicine. The negotiations hosted by Egypt with representatives from the different Palestinian factions are being held behind closed doors. The talks have yet to produce a breakthrough needed to begin the second phase in Trump's peace plan. Zahir Al-Kashif is a Palestinian analyst from Gaza, currently in Cairo. A recent positive sign, he says, was when Musa Abu Marzouk, a top Hamas official, said the Islamist militant group is ready to work with a new administration in Gaza. But his suggestion sounded like Hamas would remain part of political life in the territory. As for Hamas giving up its weapons, Al-Kashif says that's unlikely to happen anytime soon, especially if Israel does not agree to pull its troops out of Gaza, lift the siege, allow reconstruction to begin, and give amnesty to Hamas fighters who hand over their guns. And those are just some of the issues that still need to be agreed on if this peace plan is going to work. For The World, I'm Matthew Bell.
A tropical cyclone has been wreaking havoc in Southeast Asia this week. Typhoon Kalmaegi passed over the central Philippines on Monday, bringing heavy winds and widespread flooding. Over 500,000 Filipinos were displaced by the storm. More than 100 people were killed, and dozens more are still missing. In a video of the aftermath taken on Tuesday, you can see cars piled up on top of each other and debris scattered on streets still covered in ankle-deep water.
A woman speaking to the Associated Press described taking refuge on a rooftop with relatives before the roof collapsed beneath them. I lost my 3 children, my husband, my mother, and father, she said.
Typhoon Kalmaegi has since crossed over the South China Sea and made landfall in central Vietnam, bringing with it winds of up to 93 miles an hour and waves 30 feet high. The storm is forecast to drop 24 inches of rain in some areas. Civilians have been evacuated from their homes.
Kalmaegi is the 13th typhoon to hit Vietnam this year and one of the strongest. Widespread flooding due to record-breaking rainfall this season had not yet subsided when this latest storm hit.
The Vietnamese government has more than 250,000 soldiers on standby for search and rescue operations.
In Sudan, an announcement today from the Rapid Support Forces, the militia group that's been fighting the Sudanese army for the past 2 years, says it has agreed to a humanitarian truce. The Sudanese military says it will only agree to the truce if the RSF withdraws from civilian areas. The war in Sudan began as an internal conflict between these two sides, but has since drawn in powerful players from afar, notably the United Arab Emirates. Arms investigators, rights groups, and the Sudanese government all accuse the UAE of sending arms and support to the RSF, which the U.S. State Department says has committed genocide in Sudan. The World's Shirin Jafari has our report.
The images and videos coming out of Sudan show summary executions, mass killing, and displacement of civilians. About a week ago, the RSF took control of the city of El Fasher in western Darfur region.
And the slaughter can even be seen from space. Satellite pictures of the besieged city of Al Fasher show red stains in the sand and bodies strewn around.
In 2018, mass protests led to the overthrow of dictator Omar al-Bashir. The RSF and the Sudanese official military took control in a hybrid civilian military government. But this didn't last long. In 2023, the two sides started fighting. Recently, an Emirati official reflected on that moment at a gathering in Bahrain.
We all made the mistake when the two generals who are fighting the civil war today overthrew the civilian government.
Anwar Gargash, a prominent Emirati politician, went on to say that the international community failed Sudan by not intervening at the time. But the United Arab Emirates itself is accused of fueling the war in Sudan. Last year, a United Nations panel of experts provided what it called credible evidence that the UAE had sent arms to the RSF through Chad. In May, Amnesty International said that Chinese weapons had almost certainly been re-exported to the RSF by the UAE.
What we see is a pattern of weapons from around the world being exported to the United Arab Emirates and then turning up fairly quickly in the hands of RSF fighters in Sudan.
Mike Lewis is an aviation and arms control expert. He has worked on past UN panels monitoring the arms embargo on Sudan.
For example, mortar rounds and other kinds of ammunition, military vehicles produced by Emirati state companies, UAVs that are traceable to arms that have passed through the hands of the Emirati forces, and so on.
The UAE consulate in Washington didn't respond to my request for comment for this story, but the government has repeatedly denied it is arming and supporting the RSF. U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen and Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs have pushed to stop the U.S. sales of arms to the UAE, accusing the country of, quote, aiding and abetting genocide. May Hassan teaches political science at MIT. She says while the UAE has had a major influence in the war in Sudan, it is not the only one.
There's just a whole host of involvement in Sudan, in part because many of these countries are hoping for regional and international dominance, especially as the West recedes. They're seeing an opening as to how they can become bigger players on the world stage.
Sudan is the third largest country in Africa. It has over 600 miles of Red Sea coastline and plenty of fertile agricultural land.
The UAE, as this very small country in the face of climate change, global warming, wants to secure its food source for its citizens for the coming decades.
And it sees the African nation as its breadbasket, says Cameron Hudson, a Sudan expert who served on the U.S. National Security Council. When I reached him in a busy cafe this week, he said that the UAE's involvement in Sudan is not new. It was around 2010, he says, that it began to diversify its economy away from oil. And as part of that move, it made investments across the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa.
So whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in banking, whether it's in agriculture, the UAE has been an investment partner in Sudan for more than a decade.
Hudson says the UAE imports about 85% of its food from abroad. From Sudan, it gets wheat and livestock, among other things. He also says the UAE and the RSF share an anti-Islamist ideology. Meanwhile, the support for the RSF has been devastating for the people of Sudan.
The war would be over if not for the efforts of the UAE. I think the Sudanese army would have defeated the rapid support forces by now, except for the truly extraordinary efforts of the UAE.
As the war went on, the UAE built influence in Sudan and secured access to agricultural land, gold mines, and trade routes, these experts say. At the same time, the Gulf country has provided humanitarian support for displaced people. Sudan expert Cameron Hudson says the Emirates will likely help with post-war reconstruction as well. But for many Sudanese people, he adds, this will not be enough to forgive and forget. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.
Alarms are ringing for people who track bird flu outbreaks. The latest on that from Europe just ahead. You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Bird flu, also known as H5N1, is on the rise worldwide, with case numbers going up in both livestock and wild bird populations. In the UK this season, 26 cases of bird flu have been identified on farms, and farmers there are being asked to house their poultry flocks indoors to prevent further spread. Ian Brown is a virologist at the Pirbright Institute in Surrey, just outside London.
Well, at this time of year, it's not unusual for us to see a small increase in cases in bird flu in kept birds, commercial poultry particularly. But what we're seeing at the moment is a sharp increase in cases. And what we look back at previous epidemics that have been very severe and large. And at the moment, it's following the same pattern. So that's causing us a lot of concern. There's a lot of virus being carried in the wild bird population, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe. And cases in North America have also started to rise in recent weeks as well. So, we are on the precipice of a lot of uncertainty, but potentially quite a large outbreak this winter.
So far, though, it is 26 cases across the UK, mostly in England, which, to, my non-expert ears does not sound like a lot. But is that a high number for this time of year?
It is at the beginning, and the reason for that is that, well, first of all, the virus doesn't normally survive through the summer months in the UK. It did this year, which is only the second time it's managed to do that. So we already have the virus here.
Why do folks think that is?
Well, it's because the virus has managed to get into different groups and species of wild bird, which have enabled it to be maintained through the summer months, whereas we traditionally get the virus come in with the ducks and the geese and the swans that migrate into the UK for the winter, and they bring the virus with them. Whereas this time, that virus managed to oversummer in other populations, including seabirds. So that virus was ever present, and it did cause a number of cases through the summer, but the cases have started to rise sharply. It's the rate of increase that we're concerned about. So you're right, 26 on its own doesn't sound a lot. But when it's happening 2 or 3 new cases a day, we've had 11 cases in November alone. The rate of increase is why the birds are being housed, because clearly the risk has gone up. And if we house the birds, of course, we may reduce the number of cases that happen.
And by house the birds, you mean keep them inside at all times so that there is less of a risk of cross-contamination with wild birds.
That's exactly.
Is that the only change that is being enacted or that you see as necessary?
No, we've in fact had what we call an avian influenza prevention zone in place now since last December. What that means is there are minimum standards of biosecurity, how you keep your farm hygienic and clean and keep bird flu out. There's been minimum standards prescribed for keepers of birds. Obviously, the next step is to bring the birds inside. We do have quite a lot of free-range production in the UK, so that's where birds are free to roam outside. In fact, they spend most of their time living outside, probably only come inside to roost at night. So that means that their level of contact with wild birds is quite high, because you can't prevent wild birds coming into areas where there are chickens and other poultry outside. They mingle and they come into common food and water sources. So it's difficult to control.
And the stakes here for particular flocks, if one bird is infected, does the entire flock have to be culled?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. The reason being is that the likelihood that only one bird would be infected is very, very low. And if it was, say, really early in the start of the outbreak, it would very quickly spread to all the other birds. And we've got to remember, this is a very fast-spreading virus infection that has a high lethality in most species of poultry. So these birds do suffer an unpleasant death, shall we say. So obviously culling is the most effective way to humanely deal with the problem and reduce the spread.
Are there things that the UK could be doing better right now to prevent or reduce the spread of bird flu?
Well, of course, a big topic that's subject to a lot of international discussion, both over here in the UK and your side of the pond, is vaccination. There are vaccines out there now that could potentially really help us reduce the burden of disease. There are a number of procedures and protocols that need to be refined and put in place for this to be a viable option for the farmer. But vaccination will start gaining more traction in the months, weeks, and years ahead in order to try and get on top of this disease.
What are some other places of concern right now for bird flu outside of the UK?
Well, most parts of the world, apart from Oceania, have been infected by this particular group of viruses. So any country that rears poultry in substantial numbers is potentially at risk. So we've got it on all the other continents that it ebbs and flows in terms of the numbers of cases.
In terms of policies to reduce the spread of bird flu, how does the situation in the U.S. and Canada compare to the U.K.? Do you have particular concerns about how North America is handling this?
No, I would say when it comes to handling the poultry outbreak, they both work, or all those countries work off the framework set by the World Organization for Animal Health, which is sort of a body that sets down the rules for trade. And best practice for those countries at the minute is to detect infection early, restrict the farm and all the movements on and off the farm, and cull the birds as quickly as possible. And then, of course, allow those businesses to reopen when it's safe to do so through what we call restocking. So that's a pretty common international framework for dealing with such, shall we say, fast-spreading diseases.
You said we are on the edge of a lot of uncertainty, something to that effect. What will need to happen for you to say, okay, this is for sure going to be bad? What are you looking to?
Well, normally in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously that's the winter months, which of course is when the disease is most dominant and obvious. We would probably expect in the UK and Europe to start getting really strong signals by the end of the year. So in the next 4 to 6 weeks is a particularly critical time. We have to remember we have more birds on the ground because we have the Christmas market, which is a very big market in Europe and indeed in North America. So the producers have got more birds on the ground than they would normally have. And that's when you really expect to see a takeoff in cases. So they would normally peak before the end of the year. No 2 years are exactly the same, but that's generally what you see. And then we'll get a better idea whether this early signal of a sharp increase is going to be maintained.
And just as a reminder, is there any concern about spread to humans eventually, or is this really more about our food supply?
No, it's a good question. Well, it is about food supply and protecting the health and welfare of birds, but we should remember that influenza viruses can jump, and there have been a number of cases in humans, mainly people that are occupationally exposed to infected birds and probably get exposed to very high quantities of virus. We should say that this virus is a bird virus. It wants to be in a bird. It doesn't want to be in a human. However, influenza viruses mutate and change, so we need to monitor these viruses and constantly track whether they're changing their characteristics that might mean they could become more dangerous for humans. So we need to be vigilant. We need those that are in contact with birds, particularly birds if they're infected, to wear the necessary protective equipment to reduce exposure.
Ian Brown is the former director of the UK's Animal and Plant Health Agency. He is now a virologist at the Pirbright Institute in Surrey, England. You are listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. In Ukraine, the fight for the city of Pokrovsk rages on.
Pokrovsk is on the front line of the war in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine. Russian and Ukrainian forces have been locked in battle for control of the city for 18 long months. The latest reports suggest Russia may be close to capturing it. A battlefield map by a group connected to Ukraine's military shows Russian troops now in control of the southwestern edge of the city. That is despite Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky insisting on Monday that Russia had not been successful in Pokrovsk. He did acknowledge that about 30% of all fighting on the front line of the entire war had been taking place in that one city.
If Russia does take over Pokrovsk, it will be the first major Ukrainian city it's captured since 2023. That would be against a backdrop of encroaching colder weather. Russia and Ukraine have been trading near daily assaults on each other's energy infrastructure, heading into the fifth winter of fighting.
Today, Ukrainian officials said long-range drones struck a major Russian oil refinery in the Volgograd region. Russian officials have not confirmed the strike, but a local governor has blamed drones for starting a fire at an unspecified facility in the region. We will continue watching all of these developments here at The World.
Populism that gives fuel to far-right extremist politics. This is a trend we have reported on in many countries, but the story is especially vivid in Germany with the rise of the far-right extremist party, the AfD. It's a situation that has disturbing parallels with Germany's Nazi history. The AfD's electoral success of the past few years is told in the new documentary, The Rise of Germany's New Right, from our GBH colleagues at Frontline. Filmmaker Evan Williams has been reporting on this for years. He spoke with us from London this morning about the film. Evan, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It is pretty stunning, the picture you paint. You chose a point in time to mark when things visibly started to change in German politics, 2015. What was happening then?
So in 2015, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, opened up Germany's borders to more than 1 million people who were fleeing conflicts from around the world, many of them Syrians, because the civil war was really at its peak at that point. And one of the reasons she did that was to try and change the way people saw Germany, get away from the Nazi past, actually make it, we're open, we're rich, we can do this, we could do the right thing. The problem was it then very quickly started to play into the hands of the far-right extremists in the party, the Alternative for Deutschland that we look at, who then said we're being flooded by migrants, it's causing a crime wave, they're all on benefits, this is not working. And many people who were feeling disquiet about their general life and cost of living and green policies and general anxiety started to go with that narrative and started to support the AfD. So the two are very, very linked.
So the anti-immigrant racist rhetoric was alarming in part because it flew in the face of Germany's longstanding commitment to acknowledging and confronting what the country had done under Hitler. Describe how this far-right movement that denied Nazis were all that bad was also in some ways emulating that historic Nazi party.
Indeed. So it originally started as a sort of a Eurosceptic, quite a boring party. And around 2015, when the migrants came in, they turned themselves into a fiercely anti-immigrant party, and factions, very hardcore, hard right, then started to dominate where the party went. They found that this resonated with people, and at the same time, they started to identify minorities, refugees, asylum seekers as the cause of all the problems in the country. For many in the country, Germany's got a very special situation. After World War II, they set up a domestic intelligence agency to monitor and prevent the return to anything like the Nazis. This intelligence agency started to surveil the AfD, and then it started to declare various parts of the party as an extremist threat to German democracy. There's very much a formal process they have to go through for this. They have to gain intelligence. They then take it to the courts. It's not the government declaring this. It's actually a legal process. And they gather more and more evidence as the years went on.
Now, before we go on, Evan, we should probably explain this concept that's sort of relevant to all of this. It's a concept in modern German politics called the firewall, and that came about as a result of the Nazi history, kind of lessons learned. What is the firewall?
Correct. They call this the firewall. It's more or less a political convention that began pretty much after the Second World War, but of course has become much more relevant as the far-right AfD has become more powerful. They've started to win state elections, for example. So the convention is that no mainstream parties will go into a coalition or do a political deal with the AfD, with the far-right. Now, let's remember the AfD is declared by the Domestic Intelligence Agency as a suspected extremist threat, an expected far-right extremist organisation. So there is some foundation as to why these parties wouldn't want to do a deal or go into a coalition with the AfD. Now, this is becoming increasingly difficult because the AfD is gaining in electoral support. So all of a sudden, what we now have in Germany is the AfD is the second biggest party in the national parliament, and yet no party, according to this convention, can go into a coalition with them. And the AfD is saying, come on, this is ridiculous. We're now a serious political force. You cannot keep excluding us. This is not democracy. That's their position.
So this is where your film really packs a punch. You track the collapse of that political firewall over less than 2 short years of German politics, with extremism becoming normalized and mainstream parties getting pulled to the right. One clear example, your interview with AfD leader Bjorn Höcke. What did you take away from those conversations?
Well, it's interesting. Political leaders often, and I'm sure you found this, Marco, they often say one thing to the audience and they'll say something else, maybe a little bit more thought through or cautious in an interview. I found with Bjorn Hooker that he did not pull back at all. In fact, he doubled down on some of the language. For example, he talks about immigration and multiculturalism, effectively watering down what he sees as a strong German nation. And by that, he's referring to a very ethno-nationalist version of what Germany should be. He's very opposed to immigration, very opposed to refugees coming into the country. He says this is potentially going to lead to a civil war. This is language that he uses in the interview and in his speeches. He is, by the way, he is a confirmed far-right extremist by domestic intelligence. So is his party in the state of Thuringia in eastern Germany.
And he's faced prosecution for things he said, right?
Well, exactly. So he used a known Nazi phrase, alles für Deutschland, everything for Germany. He used it once. He was then charged. He used it then again while that charge was still in front of the courts. So he did this twice. And was then found guilty and fined $30,000 for doing this. Now, this is part of the defensive democracy you raised earlier, Marco, when we're talking about the conventions in Germany. Nazi phrases, Nazi symbols are illegal in Germany. And if you use them, then you face criminal prosecution. And what Bjorn Hooker does repeatedly is to push the boundaries of what is acceptable, push the boundaries of what people are hearing about. And they see this, they attract voters because voters who are fed up with the mainstream parties, they see this as a sort of an act of rebellion. It's all based in ethno-nationalism, in this idea of racial purity, anti-immigrants, anti-brown people. You know, members in the party do not shy away from this sort of language.
There are several leaders he spoke with in the AfD who claim they don't recall certain propaganda details used by Nazis, that they seemingly have adopted whole cloth. Bjorn Hooker is one, and as you point out, he's a history teacher. As you know, it's long been a concern among Jews worldwide that as the survivors of the Holocaust and their offspring die, the memory of what happened also disappears. Are we truly looking at generational forgetfulness, or did you get the sense that these AfD people are lying about their memory?
Well, my personal view is that people in Germany in these positions know what they're saying. And it's something supported by our interviews with domestic intelligence officers. They are deliberately pushing the boundaries of acceptability because they see it as talking to changing or reducing or watering down the memories of that nationalist past. I think there is a really interesting thing you just touched on there, though, which is when we get to young people. It was been pointed out to me that one of the reasons many young people are now voting for the AfD, for the far right, is because this generation is the first without a living memory connection to the World War II. And so they don't have that living memory connection of the horrors of what actually happened. And this is one of the reasons, and also because of the AfD's very successful social media campaign, which only focuses on positive things. Many young people see them as a centrist party. They don't see them as an extremist threat. They don't believe what the government is saying about their beliefs because they want to they want to find an alternative. So there is a combination of those things.
We're hearing my conversation with Evan Williams, the reporter behind the new Frontline documentary, The Rise of Germany's New Right. He's describing the internal forces that propelled the far right to popularity there. There were also external factors like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance. Williams told us how AfD politician Alice Weidel got a boost from powerful people outside of Germany, namely U.S. politicians.
Well, these are, again, extraordinary events. I mean, we started filming this in September last year, and then by just towards the end of December, Elon Musk then gave Alice Weidel a 1-hour live interview on X, where they discussed certain things like, you know, the party calls you far right, tell them why you're not far right, that sort of thing. Then in early January, at one of the main party congresses, Elon Musk phoned in on video call to the party congress and was basically telling everybody to support the AfD. The AfD is the only way to save Germany. And then he also mentioned that Germans shouldn't be guilty of the past. You should get away from the guilt and be proud of your culture. Now, of course, everybody should be proud of themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. The issue in Germany is that the remembrance of the Nazi events is something that is held very sacred as a way of reminding people that Germany has a responsibility to defend human rights going forward in liberal democracy. And when Musk uses that platform and that power that he's got, that profile, it seems to endorse the more extreme view that you should sort of somehow just sort of downplay the Nazi side of things and move forward. And so the more extreme parts of the party felt, as one of our commentators says, ordained because of this intervention. Later on, Vice President J.D. Vance at a Munich security conference just a couple of weeks before the federal election told the Congress that there was no room for firewalls, a specific reference. Now, that was seen by German leaders and commentators as an extraordinary intervention and something that they are obviously quite angry about because they felt they don't need to be told by the American administration how they treat what is deemed an extremist or suspected extremist party in their country.
And this is where politics really make the strangest bedfellows. While some U.S. politicians have been overtly supportive of the AfD, you also track how Russian disinformation campaigns were covertly stoking support for the AfD. How'd that happen?
Yes, indeed. So we started looking at that just after the European elections in June 2024, June last year. We started hearing information that there were allegations that Russia had been involved in a disinformation campaign to boost, amplify and support far-right parties across Europe. This was extraordinary because there'd been lots of suspicion that the Russians were somehow involved, but nothing really concrete. So then I found a journalist in Estonia who had received and obtained about 410 documents that have been leaked from an organization called the Social Design Agency in Russia. An organization known to be very close to the Kremlin. And these documents spelt out what the disinformation campaign was in very clear detail, how they were using false news sites to put out fake news, how they were using fake accounts to put fake comments on all types of social media, all of which was aimed at boosting the far-right messaging and the far-right parties just before the European election. And a lot of this stuff was fascinating. It was ramping up fear of immigrants, fear of supporting Ukraine, all the money's going down the drain, all these sort of talking points the far-right uses, both in Germany and France in particular. What they are doing is picking up on aspects of society which people are a bit worried about, but it amplifies it. Now, one important aspect of this, people often ask me, did it have any impact? It's very hard to know, but what we can say is it's definitely happening. And in these elections in Europe, you don't need much of a percentage sway for a party to get in.
Do you know how this looks to some parts of American conservatism, like this alignment with the AfD, while also the AfD is getting support from the Kremlin?
It's a fascinating realignment, isn't it? I don't know how it looks from their point of view. All I can say is that we can see the evidence of it happening. I think one of our commentators says in the film that there could be the common ground about the anti-wokeism, the family values. I don't think they contact each other and say, let's support the far right, but we are definitely seeing a realignment where that common ground is now being shared by those two administrations. And it is having an impact. I think Elon Musk's intervention has made the AfD, in the eyes of many, more acceptable, particularly maybe people who may not have thought about voting for them up until that point.
Yeah, so the federal election this year, briefly just remind us how the AfD did.
Well, they doubled their share of the vote. They did very, very well across the country. This is in the national election. They got to 21%. Which made them the second biggest party in the country. Now, you could argue that that's 21% and that therefore 80% of the country didn't vote for them, and that's very true. But they were only 4 to 5% behind the main party that won that national election, and polling ever since the election has now put them, if not equal, then slightly above the governing or the ruling party. We are seeing a trajectory here of increasing support. And I think one of the reasons is that the mainstream parties are not necessarily answering people's questions about higher cost of living and all this sort of thing. And they are successfully convincing people that the problem is immigration.
Indeed. Bringing this into focus today, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz announced this week that Syrian refugees are no longer eligible for asylum and people need to go home. What does that tell you about the AfD's influence now?
Well, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I think what we can see there is that the centre is now worried about bleeding votes to the far right. So they are dragging the centre to the right, and they're saying that these people who are given sanctuary can now go home. And it's much more complicated than it seems, but what we are seeing, and this is not just in Germany, is that the far right is dragging the centre to the right. And once they've done that, people generally, commentators we interview, say once the centre does that, it tends not to give them the votes they think they're losing. It tends to enhance the vote for the far right because people say, well, they've got it right because now everybody's doing it. And that's what we're going to see happening in Germany.
There is a phrase that comes up in your film, using democracy to destroy democracy. What do you want American viewers to learn from your film about German political extremism, Evan?
I think if you look at the German experience, and this is something we tried to weave into the film, Germany went through the dictatorship of the Nazis. That's why it set up the institutions that it has. And as one of our senior domestic intelligence officers that we speak to says, let's remember, people voted for the Nazis. They didn't take over in a revolution. They got into power through democracy. They've been through that experience of democratic institutions being destroyed by dictatorship. That's why they have the domestic intelligence. And I think all countries that are going through modern times should perhaps look at Germany and learn whatever lessons we can take away from. And Germany has been through that experience. And so we can learn a lot from them, I think.
Evan Williams reported the new documentary, The Rise of Germany's New Right, for our GBH colleagues at Frontline. Evan, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks for the interest. Really appreciate it.
The Rise of Germany's New Right premiered this week. Check your local PBS stations for streaming details.
Just ahead, efforts to get control of plastics and plastic waste. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Plastics and microplastics are everywhere, from the North Pole to Mount Everest, even inside of our bodies. Scientists are pretty much in agreement that there is too much plastic, but so far governments have failed to agree on how to curb production and waste. That's inspired a search for cleaner ways to make plastic and get rid of it. The World's Jerry Haddon reports from Valencia, Spain.
The world produces nearly 400 million metric tons of plastic a year, and making it is messy. Usually, you mix crude oil derivatives with toxic catalysts to create plastic's basic building blocks. The waste from the process, heavy metals and volatile organic compounds, is dangerous and hard to dispose of. But in a lab at Valencia's Polytechnical University, researchers have found what they say is a much cleaner way to make that basic plastic. Instead of adding toxins, they're using basically nothing. On a recent morning, 27-year-old doctoral student Susie Hernandez seals samples from her most recent tests inside tiny vials for analysis.
Y al ver que lo conseguíamos sin el catalizador, sin disolventes.
When we saw the promising results without adding any catalyst at all, she says, we showed it to colleagues and they were surprised. As was Hernandez's team, which accidentally discovered that just letting the precursor interact with air was enough to kickstart the chemical reaction. Lead investigator Antonio Leva says, scaled up, the technique could be revolutionary.
Nuestros cálculos preliminares serían que sería entre 1 y 2 órdenes de magnitud.
It's up to 100 times cleaner than traditional methods, he says, and you get a pure polymer with no toxic residue, just ozone, which we can capture and use to purify water, for example. Leva says they've patented the technique and that more than one startup has come sniffing around. With the global treaty to end plastic pollution stalled, there could be money in making plastic more cleanly and cheaply. That same possibility is helping drive research on the other side of plastic's life cycle, after it's been thrown away. That sound, it's the collective hum of the Mare Nostrum 5 in Barcelona's supercomputing center. Mare Nostrum 5 is one of the world's fastest computers. It can make hundreds of trillions of calculations per second. For scientific research, it can save humans years of work.
My name is Victor Guayar. I lead a group in the life science department, and our group in particular does a lot of computational predictions on biomolecules.
Guayar and his team here have designed a genetically modified microbe that can break down common plastics like throwaway water bottles or the film in food packaging.
Our study shows that it's straightforward to degrade, and then you can get a bacteria that doesn't do anything to plastic, just insert 2 or 3 mutations, and suddenly that bacteria starts breaking the plastic.
Inserting mutations so that when the bacteria comes into physical contact with tiny microplastics, they break the bonds that hold them together. Guayar describes it as basically arming the bacteria with molecular scissors. That part's done in a different lab in Madrid using the gene splicing technology known as CRISPR.
Once you have that, the bacteria will duplicate, so you don't have to do that all the time. You do it once, you create a new line of bacteria, and that bacteria then will be just growing, and that's it, then you cultivate it.
This bacteria won't degrade more complex plastics, but like the other project in Valencia, Guayar says potential investors are interested in this breakthrough. He says it needs scaling from nanoparticles to the large volumes of plastics we see in, say, garbage dumps. But he believes one day we'll see plastic-hungry bacteria at work in recycling centers, and even as additives in, say, food, to remove the microplastics accumulating in our bodies.
The bacteria that we take in yogurts, the bacteria that we take in supplemented, we can put one of these proteins in that bacteria that will be degrading nanoparticles of plastics in our stomach or in our digestive system.
Or one day, Guayar says, we might be able to engineer the roots of plants to do the same thing, cleaning the soil. The possibilities of doing plastic better, both making it and degrading it, are potentially endless. But, cautions Judith Unk, at this point, these discoveries are more distraction than viable solution.
I think they are well-intentioned, but I do have to say that we've heard of these so-called breakthroughs for decades now, and none of it has made a dent in the overall problem of plastic waste.
Unk is the author of a new book called The Problem with Plastic and president of the environmental group Beyond Plastics.
We need the great minds of science, but we really need them focused on reduction.
Among other things, Unk lobbies for the end of single-use plastics, a return to glass bottles, cardboard containers, things that can be recycled. As for making it more cleanly, she doesn't think the big plastic makers, namely multinational oil companies, will ever embrace a new technology that undermines their current system. Not voluntarily anyway. Switching would be too costly. As for bacteria that can chop up microplastics, that scares her.
The smaller the plastic, the greater the risk, because it's going to move around more easily in our bodies. There are recent peer-reviewed scientific reports documenting the presence of microplastics, meaning 5 millimeters or less, in our heart arteries, in our blood, in our kidneys, in our brains.
Guayar at the Barcelona Computing Center agrees that just making plastic pieces tinier isn't the endgame. He says his team and other scientists are working on other microbes that can metabolize the smallest plastic byproducts, producing only organic waste. But that sparks other concerns for Dr. Anja Brandon. She did doctoral work on metabolizing plastics at Stanford. She says she doesn't want to discount this new research, but says any way you break down something made from oil, it's going to be dangerous.
So I think it's just worth being thoughtful that, plastics are fossil fuels. Breaking down plastics is the same as burning gas.
Today, Brandon directs plastics policy at the NGO Ocean Conservancy.
They are, depending on the plastic, are just different types of carbon-hydrogen chains. And every single one of those carbons, if you are breaking it down aerobically, it's either going to turn to methane or CO2.
Both powerful greenhouse gases linked to global warming. But as Valencia researcher Antonio Leva puts it, while weaning ourselves off plastic is the ultimate answer, is that really possible today? Can we make cell phones out of wood, he asks? If you look around, he says, plastic is everywhere. For The World, I'm Jerry Haddon, Valencia.
Finally today, a mystery has been solved. It began with a video taken by a trucker driving down a road in the south of Ireland.
The video shows a peculiar animal trotting into the woods. It has 4 legs, a mane, and a tail with a fluffy tip. You know, a lion. Except, of course, Ireland is not supposed to have lions.
When the police tracked down the animal, they discovered that it was not a big carnivorous cat. It was actually a dog, specifically a Newfoundland, that gentle canine giant, that had most of its coat below the neck shaved, which made it look uncannily like a lion. No one's sure why the dog sported that hairstyle. The current guess is it must have been a Halloween costume.
And as if this story does not include enough mistaken identity for you, one more detail. The dog masquerading as a big cat, it is named Mouse.
We can call this one the mouse that aspired to roar. The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. You can find us online anytime at theworld.org. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Join us right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.